Hi, my name is Margaret Wang, and I'm here today with Dr. John Astin, professor at Santa Clara University. And today, Dr. Astin is going to tell us a little bit about his book, his upcoming book, It's Not What You Think It Is. So tell us a little bit about some meditation approaches that you discuss in your book.
It's great to be here, Margaret. Thank you for
Thank
inviting me. I think that I got involved with meditation. You asked about meditation many, many years ago when I was 19, and I practiced for many years in several different traditions, and was doing research also along the way in school and grad school, and continued on with that process. And in the 90s, I guess it was, and yeah, when I was doing my doctorate, I got introduced to some of the mindfulness practices that have now become much more prominent. We see in healthcare, and researchers have gotten very interested in them. And so I practiced those very diligently and was studying them, as I said. And around 2000, I had an experience that really transformed my understanding about meditation and sort of flipped it all upside down on its head. And I'm setting this kind of as a context I think is important to share with you kind of how I approach this in my own work. Basically what I found was that if I were to try to encapsulate what I was endeavoring to do through these different meditation practices, was I was trying to become more conscious, more aware, more present, more mindful, more aware of this moment in a sense, which would be one way to typically describe what's meant by that term, mindfulness. But one of the things that I discovered was that what I had been trying to do through these practices really for a couple of decades was actually, unbeknownst to me, already occurring. So for example, I was trying to become more aware, and yet I already was aware. In fact, we could say awareness or consciousness or being sentient is very much defines our experience in life. This is what, in fact, without awareness, without consciousness or sentience, we wouldn't even know we were here having this particular experience that's occurring. So we could say in this moment, for example, awareness or consciousness is fully evident, fully present. It's like there's lights here that are illuminating us, right? They're making us more visible to those who are watching. And awareness is can be likened to a light, in a sense. It's the consciousness that is active in us as organisms is illuminating and making known what's here. It's like as if we're in a dark room and nothing. Imagine you're in a dark room, you can't see anything, right? So in a sense, nothing's happening. You can't see anything, you can't feel anything, you can't know anything. And then suddenly you turn the light of consciousness on, and then suddenly sensation and thought and feeling and all these aspects of the human experience become illuminated. They become known. So what I found back then, in around 2000, was that, and my practice really shifted to reflect this, and now how I share it with others is, really, the way I teach meditation is to really notice what's already here, to begin to appreciate that we're aware. You're aware right now. And just we tend to kind of take that for granted. Oh, what's the big deal? Well, yeah, of course I'm aware. But actually, the fact that you're aware turns out to be, well, maybe the most extraordinary thing that's occurring. Like, how is it that we're aware? I don't mean that analytically, like, well, the brain is firing in this particular way, interesting as that may be. More, how is it that life is conscious, in a sense? How is this moment being known? And that, of course, is just an unthinkable, maybe ultimately unknowable question. But in any event, to come back to the point around meditation, that for example, another term that's used instead of mindfulness or awareness is presence, becoming more present to what's here.
So what I'm hearing is this idea of awareness and bringing in this awareness of the details that we might ordinarily miss. Is that right?
That tends to be, I mean, that can be one dimension that is worthwhile to explore, and to some extent I do that in my work. What I was speaking about earlier is a little bit different in this sense, which is to really begin to appreciate that a very simple fact, but actually a very powerful fact, I would say, which is that this moment is present, that something's here. And in a certain way, it doesn't matter what that is. I mean, yes, 1,000 different things present themselves from moment to moment. It's constantly changing, right?
Right.
But what's it like to just appreciate the fact that this moment is even present at all, that something's here? No matter how we might describe it, good, bad, positive, negative, neutral, it's always here, isn't it?
It's being able to appreciate the richness.
Yes, and the starting point, I would say, is stay with, I encourage people to stay with just the fact that what's here is present, and feel the presence of it. I mean, you're feeling the presence of it anyway. Right now, you and I are feeling what's here, which is how we know that something's here. We know that, right, if I were to say, Margaret, is anything happening right now in your experience? What would you say?
I would say yes.
But something, of course, is happening.
I am feeling the arm against my chair,
Right.
and I'm feeling my foot planted on the ground.
You're feeling light, you're feeling sound, you're feeling thoughts if they're present, you're feeling everything in a sense that is making itself known in the moment, right? So our tendency as humans is to emphasize the content of our experience or the descriptions of it. And this gets to kind of the book's focus, right? So we emphasize the content of it. Well, what's the, you think about each experience as like a different flavor. Well, this is, you know, we have ice cream flavors, there's vanilla, there's chocolate, and we have human experiential flavors. This is easy, this is difficult, this is clear, this is confusing, this is ecstatic, this is exasperatingly painful, right? These are all just like different flavors, different textures of what's present. And our tendency is to be so focused on those textures and our definitions that we've given to these textures. What we then tend to do is we equate our fulfillment, our well-being, and so on with particular kinds of content, particular flavors of experience, the ones that we like, or the ones that we conventionally or traditionally think of as the good ones.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the flavors that are the not good ones, or the less desirable ones, well, we try to do whatever we can to minimize those, get away from those, transform them, avoid them, and so on, right? But what's very, very powerful is to make a slight shift in our attention from the content of what we're experiencing to just the fact of its presence. Does that make sense? So, for example, if you were to just try, it's difficult right now, but if you were to try to characterize in a word or two, like what your primary felt sense is right now of what if you're trying to characterize your experience, what might you say? How would you describe it? Might be difficult to do, but if you had just a couple of words, how would you describe this moment right now?
This moment, I think it would be characterized by light and heat.
Okay. How about the emotional tone of it?
The emotional tone would be
could be anything. There's no right answer. So.
Serenity and
okay. All right. Great.
calm.
Okay. Cool. All right. So now that's describing something, serenity, calm, describing something that's present, which I argue in the book, or invite people to consider in the book, because it's not so much about making arguments, but philosophical arguments, but more I invite people to explore their experience and discover that the labels that we give experience are, they're kind of like caricatures of our experience. They're sort of a way of, like shorthand almost, where I try to put in a little quick and dirty framework called a word, or words, what experience is. And so it's very, very powerful and liberating, I would say, to begin to discover, to, again, as I said, shift attention away from the description and the content just for a moment, and just feel what's present here. Not so focused on what it is that's present, the content or description, but just the sheer existence of it, just the fact that it's here.
That felt sense.
The felt sense that it's here, and just to feel that. And what's really quite extraordinary is that we could say, imagine, for example, if I were to say to you, is it possible to discover a kind of okayness or sense of aliveness, no matter what's happening? Like, not that denies difficulty and problems, if you will, but that somehow has a capacity to feel that there's still, to feel a sense of fullness, even in the midst of difficulty. Right? Do you think that that's possible?
Oh, yes.
Right.
Like if you are experiencing frustration,
Okay.
it can feel irritating while there's so much energy and power to it.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And the energy and the power of it, I would argue, is found in the presence of it. Because the presence of it is the here-ness of it, the existence of it. And it's wildly alive and dynamic and vital and present, right? And so that's true in the moments that we really love and we aspire to get more of, like serenity and happiness. But it's also the case with those moments that we would describe as uncomfortable, difficult, I hate that this is happening, I wish this would go away, whatever, however we might characterize the things that we kind of wish weren't happening.
The things that we resist.
Right, the stormy weather.
Right.
Like we like the good weather when it's sunny and bright, but you know, in the stormy weather, it's also life too, isn't it? It's also alive, it's also vital. And so by tuning in, as it were, to the presence of the here-ness of all of our experience, we touch a kind of what I sometimes call like the common denominator of everything. Well, what would that be? Well, I would say one way to put it would be everything's alive. Everything is alive. All experience is aliveness, is life itself, or to use my earlier word, is present or presence. Everything is present. Everything is alive. And that can become an incredibly powerful ally to a human being to discover this, to begin to appreciate that no matter how their experience is being described, it's present. And the fact of its presence is an incredible resource. It's, in a way, we could say it's what's most true about experience, because our descriptions, wonderful as they may be, are partial. They can't fully encapsulate, encompass the depth and the complexity of experience. But what we can say undeniably with great certainty is that experience is here. Something's here, right? Feels like it.
Yes.
I mean, maybe we're dreaming.
But
even if we're dreaming, there's still the sense of something here, right?
There's still that presence.
There's still that presence. And here's what's amazing, to come back to your earlier question about meditation, which is that I spent years trying to become more present, only to discover in a kind of amazing moment of my life that I had it all upside down. The reality is that I couldn't escape presence. I mean, how could I ever get out of presence? For example, let's say you had a moment where, I wasn't feeling very present. I wasn't feeling very aware or mindful. Well, what I would say is, that's what was present.
You were
Feeling.
aware that you weren't aware.
Exactly. How could you report back to me, Dr. Astin, I had this moment, I noticed that I wasn't very aware. And I would say to you, per this thread that we're following right now, how do you know that? Well, because you actually were present to that. That's how you can tell me that you weren't present. So it's not just, I'm actually not just playing word games here. This is actually really profound, because to know that we can't help but be here, to be present, to be aware, can bring a great relaxation and a sense of like, oh, wow, I'm always here, I'm always present. And no matter what texture or flavor my experience may be taking, I can't escape the fact of its presence and its existence. And we might think, years ago I wrote a song about this, that we might think, oh my God, that sounds like bondage. I can't escape presence, right? But no, actually, ironically, it's actually our greatest freedom, because it's like saying, well, it's discovering, I should say, that you can't escape this vitality, which is what the mythologist Joseph Campbell was asked when he was being interviewed by Bill Moyers many years ago. What are human beings searching for? And Moyers asked him, well, I've always heard that what human beings are longing for is to feel a sense of meaning and purpose. And what Campbell said to him, I mean, not that Campbell knows the answer to that question, because who does? But his point was, his sense was that what humans are searching for is not a sense of purpose and meaning, but a sense of aliveness. A sense of feeling aliveness. And the reason they might search out a sense of meaning and purpose is it makes them feel alive, right? Which I would say, makes some sense. But again, to come back to this point I was making about, well, yes, we search for things that make us feel more alive, but what if we tuned into the fact that we're always alive? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That aliveness is really it's the nature of life, is that it's alive, isn't it? That everything is vital, that everything is dynamic, and we can see that. Even something that we might think of as feeling kind of stuck and static and caught in sort of like I feel like I can't move, I'm right, that sense, we all know what that's like. But even that, if we actually look at it, is alive. It's even if it feels like, so feeling closed and shut down is alive.
Feeling that stuckness.
Right. It's just another texture and flavor of experience. So now, through discovering that, we in a sense awaken to a kind of you could say, the magic of every moment, in a sense, the miracle of every moment, the vitality of every moment is its presence.
Yeah.
And we don't have to do something to obtain that, to acquire that, to cultivate that, as we might often think, because it's actually present. As, however, this moment is presenting itself, is its presence, is its, again, it's always different, isn't it? Each moment is never the same. Each moment is unique. It's always shifting. And yet, it's always present. And that, as I said, is a very powerful thing to start to appreciate. And again, as I would say to people, and it's not, you don't want to take my word for it, but it's worthwhile, I would argue, to check it out in your own experience. And the shift, again, is to move attention, just for a moment, whenever one thinks to do this, away from the content or the description of what's happening, because that's what we're used to. How are you? Well, and then we go into the description. But what if we shifted and say, how are you? I'm present, which is always true. Life is present. This moment is present. And that's a very, very powerful way to practice it is not typically talked about in many of the spiritual meditative practices.
My understanding is that other practices might focus on how you are doing it in a right or wrong way.
Correct.
Whereas you're suggesting that just being present,
Right.
just being aware is doing it, quote unquote, correctly.
Well, I'd even take it a step further to say it's not possible to do it incorrectly. So in other words, if we were just sitting here, and in a sense you don't have to do anything special to contrive like a state of meditation, but you sit here and you just allow experience to be whatever it is. And that's not difficult to do because it doesn't take any work, does it? Experience is just happening, isn't it?
Right.
Spontaneously. Experience, I mean, I don't feel as if on a personal level I'm doing something to make this moment be here. It's here, just spontaneously.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? In all of its different forms and textures and flavors, it's here. And so the way I introduce people to meditative practices is to just appreciate, just notice the fact that experience is present constantly and constantly changing, and you don't need to do anything about it. It's just here, unfolding, dynamically so, constantly morphing and changing into, it's like I say experience is a shapeshifter. I mean, we've been sitting here for however long, 20, 25 minutes, and how many different experiences have we been through? Well,
Many.
who knows? Many. Because from instant to instant, what's here is shifting, even if slightly. What's here this instant is different from what was here an instant before, and then the next instant, and the next instant. So this is a kind of a continuous stream of experiencing. And what's it like to just notice that and appreciate that? And you could say, let yourself revel in that and be astounded by that. And that's kind of more how I sort of see meditation. And again, it isn't a doing. You don't have to do something to make that so. You can just appreciate that that is the case. You could say it's the fact that something's here.
It's already taking place.
It's already, the moment unfolds and vanishes without we don't have to cooperate in that process somehow or approve of it to happen. Right? It's okay, we don't have to give, life just is doing that.
The train keeps
The train
going.
keeps going. And there's a way in which it may sound, even the way we're talking about, as if we're somehow this static thing that's just kind of watching the train cruise by. But in a sense, it's really powerful to see, like, no, actually, we're in a very real way inseparable from this flow of experience. We are the train.
We are part of it.
We are part of the train of
moving
experiencing.
with the train.
Yeah, I mean, what are we but this experience, the experiential flow that is occurring? And that's very enlivening to begin to get a feel for that. And it's, yeah, I mean, to me, it's just an astounding thing. And I never tire somehow of marveling at just the fact that something is present. Like that's, I mean, we could say it's possible that nothing could be present. I mean, it could have worked out that way, but nope, something's here.
Right.
You know, like the light switches on,
Right.
and something's occurring. And what's occurring is unfathomable.
Oh yeah.
Unfathomable, ultimately, even if we have lots of fancy ways of trying to explain it all. I don't know if we'll ever get to the bottom of really being able to explain how things happen to be here. I mean, maybe we could explain it in terms of the Big Bang or something. But I'm not sure how much of an explanation that ultimately is, because the Big Bang appears to still be happening, like, in a way. This is still the Big Bang.
Yeah. We're just an
This is
extension
still,
of it.
We're just an ongoing extension of that primal explosion that brought creation or existence into manifestation somehow. And whether one gives that a theological explanation or not, in a sense, for me, from my standpoint, even a theological explanation, in a way, isn't really an explanation, because it doesn't, it's just sort of, it's an attempt to try to explain maybe what's ultimately not explainable, and is just something to be, for me, to be in complete awe of, and wonder of the mystery of our experience.
Something just to be felt.
Yeah, and is being felt.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is right. It is being felt as
Right.
this moment.
As
We're
it
feeling
happens.
we're feeling it as it happens, on the fly, in real time, right? And this is another interesting thing about, asking about my approach to meditation. Just to give you one more example, there's an emphasis in the mindfulness tradition on being in the present moment, right? Well, so it sounds like I have to work hard and practice, maybe for many years, on my meditation cushion or in my spiritual ashram or center to become to get into the present moment, right? So I flip that upside down on its head and say, is it possible to be anywhere other than the present moment?
Right. Right.
I mean, try to get out of the present moment. Where would you go?
It's inescapable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How would you get out of here? Well, you can't. So again, you're caught in the fact that there's only ever, what's real is what's here presently. And we might think about the past, right? Reminisce about the past, or anticipate something we call the future. But those actions of thinking of the past or anticipating the future occur now. They always occur now. So the present moment, from my vantage, isn't something to get oneself into by virtue of some practice, but simply something that we can appreciate is what's real, what's always the case, which is, this that's here. Like, there's a fun little practice that I sometimes invite people to do, is just, can you notice in your experience where now is? Can you feel that? Like this, the immediacy of now. Can you feel the presence of that? When does that take place? Now.
We can't really feel it because in every now moment,
Right.
it's gone.
Exactly. So in a sense, we can't even find now, let alone the past and the future. Now that again can sound like abstract philosophy, but actually I would say it's the complete opposite. That's actually what's actual about. You just said it. If you look to find what's present now, you notice that it slips away because the next moment arises. So we can't ever quite grasp hold of it.
Yes.
It's too slippery, right?
And with that, we
Are we running out of
unfortunately
time?
the now has ended.
Evaporated.
Yes, it has
Perfect.
gone.
Good.
Thank you so much, Dr. Astin.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Margaret.
Yeah. Thank you.